Hello and welcome. Welcome back to Deep Noetics. We are on our sixth episode. Sound is fine. We are on our sixth episode, and today we're speaking about technocracy, totalitarianism, and mind control. So that is a big topic, but it is also a bit of a specialty of mine. Because, as you may know, I taught a course on the philosophy of the machine, specifically on the philosophy of technics, speaking about technology and how technology is a historical event that is unfolding, an event that we are all engaged in, an event that we have all submitted to some extent. Especially me, as I'm here surrounded by technological devices and transmitting my speech entirely via technological means. If I didn't have these means, there would be nobody here to listen to what I'm speaking, and I would be a little strange in speaking the way I do. So, let us begin. Today, hey, Jolazakis, you're my most most reliable viewer. I'm very happy about that. There's always going to be at least one person listening to this live. I can rely on this. Good to see you. So, as I said, the topics today are going to focus around technology, technocracy, and what it means in the context of power in our modern age. I'd like to remind you to subscribe to my channel, like my video, follow me on my Substack. You can support my work if you want to support my work financially. You can do it on Substack. I will publish something today on philosophy of technology. And also check out my courses. Links are in the description. My course on the philosophy of the machine, as well as my upcoming course on the philosophy of power. You can also use the QR code to sign up for that. I'll leave the QR code there for like a minute, and then I'll proceed. So, what does it mean that we are in the age of the machine? We have a circumstance. We live in a situation, in a circumstance that seems to be different or remarkable or unique historically. Historically speaking, technology would have been something that was ready at hand, a means to an end, a tool to achieve a certain aim. That is one way you can see technology in the pre-modern age as achieving a certain aim by using a technological tool. For example, using a hammer to fix something, to build something, using a chariot, a horse cart to get from A to B. But in these cases, what you're seeing is a redirection of natural forces that we are in direct connection with. We have a direct familiarity of our own strength, of our own force, and that force and strength is amplified and leveraged when using a hammer. In the same way, we have a familiarity of the strength of a horse. It is a natural animal. It is a living being that is then tied to a chariot that then allows for transportation. But we are redirecting a force of nature when we are using the chariots, when we are connecting horses to instruments of transportation. Similarly, you can speak of a mill that is using the force of the river. You can step into the river as a person and you feel the force. You feel the force pushing you, wanting to drag you down the river. And nowadays, you have a difference, a specific difference that pertains to the alienation, you could say, or the unfamiliarity, the uncanniness of technology that has encroached upon us without us having that direct familiarity with it anymore. Every one of us has a phone, or almost every one of us has a phone, a computer, is surrounded by devices that we do not know how they work. We would not be able to fix them if they were broken. We are surrounded by technology that is alien to us. If you look at cities, most cities in Europe, outside of the US, or in the Middle East, are very old cities, and you see their original borders, you see the original size of the city. Many of them still have an old town, an old part, an old district that used to be in the entire city for, you could say, 95% of its time that it existed, and suddenly in the last 100 years it has grown to such a proportion that that old town, that original part of the city, is no longer even 10% of the city. For example, go to Athens, go to Jerusalem. Those are very old examples. Or even go to cities that are of medieval age in Germany, in France, in Britain. You will see that the old town is just a tiny spot. It's just a little speck of what the city has become now. And that large part of it has only come about in the last 100 or maybe 200 years. And for most of its history, we only had that little center. That really exemplifies this explosion, this event, this historical event we're in, that is technology. And furthermore, if you look at the forces, going back to the windmill, going back to the watermill, we no longer have a river we can step in. We can no longer feel the breeze of the wind that is turning the turbines, so to say, of the windmill. We can no longer feel the river that is pushing the watermill, but we are now in touch with technology via electricity, via information, via fossil fuels or nuclear power. These are all forces. These are all forces that we cannot directly engage with. We can maybe have a very light, soft sting of electricity going through our fingertips, or we can look at the fire that ignites when burning fossil fuels or something like that, but we no longer directly engage in that force, as it is so powerful, it is so strong that it would destroy us. Getting electric current that we use every day shot through our body would kill us instantly. In any ways, being directly trying to access the energy of petrol or diesel or coal would poison us. These are forces that originally would be dangerous. A river can pull you off, pull you away, drag you away. You can drown in a river. A horse can go wild and be dangerous as well. But now we have forces that we cannot directly engage with at all. They've become so dangerous that we will perish in direct encounter with them. So something has happened. Something has happened. Something crucial has changed. And we've entered a different kind of world. And it is happening, and it's weird. It's happening so quickly, and it's accelerating so quickly that we cannot ignore it. But we also adapt to it so quickly that it has become normal. We don't even notice the speed of its change. We look at people, and we used to have stories of our grandparents telling us, you know, back in their days, there was no TV perhaps, or there was no computers for sure. They only had maybe the radio or something like that. But nowadays, even young people, even I can even say I remember a time where there was no smartphones. I can remember a time where there was no tablets. Remember a time where there was no streaming services, no Netflix, no social media. So even for young people, they can remember a time where a certain technology wasn't around that has already become so normal, that has already become ubiquitous. I mean, I can remember a time before Facebook, and Facebook has already gotten old. It's already not even like the cool platform or the most popular platform people engage with. Oh, maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe it is most popular if you account for all the older people that use it nowadays. But anyways, we can agree and we can understand that we are living in a peculiar age when it comes to the rise of technology. So there's different ways of conceptualizing this. There's different ways of looking at it. Was there a certain hard break? How did that come about? Was it the steam engine? Is there a particular invention we can point at? Is there a particular invention we can say it was the steam engine, definitely? Or it was the radio, definitely? And the thing is, it is almost pointless to engage in such a behavior because each stage represents a new kind of acceleration. Our age today is dominated by the computer and not really by the steam engine at all anymore. How many steam engine powered trains have you guys been on lately? So we can say, it started with the computer, but like arguably this event of radical technologization happened before that. I mean, there was no computers or no widely used personal computers, at least during the world wars, but those were already highly technologized wars. So I'd like to refer to an author that I think is very interesting in that regard, and that is Lewis Mumford. He wrote a book called The Myth of the Machine, and he actually traces back technology all throughout the entirety of history and basically weaves a connection between this unusual, uncanny modern age and technology historically, and shows how it has persisted throughout the ages and has now come to the forefront in a new phase, in a new eon, you could say, in a new state of matter. Now, for example, if you start with the steam machine, with the steam engine that many commonly associate with the rise of industrialization, you could also say, well, what about the synchronized and discretized and unified labor that was necessary to bring forward such a system that would emerge with the steam engine? What I'm trying to say is, what about the clock? The clock was there well before. The mechanical clock was there well before the steam engine and had already begun allowing a transition of the rationalized behavior of the monks, the rational behavior of the Christian monks, the synchronized and repetitive and structured behavior of the monks to be extended to all of society, as the clock could dictate the time of the beginning of work and the exact synchronization of ritual practices in society according to a mechanism. And another example that Mumford may mention would be something like glasses. The capability of people being able to read at a higher age and thus take in more information, also pass on more information, and thus really expands the leverage that the written language, and especially the printing press, another technology you could bring, and you could mention that was older than the steam engine. The printing press would also allow for a certain homogenization and synchronization of society based on the written word. So you had these factors, you had these various factors that played into this. And it is important to understand this because a form of the steam engine, for example, had already existed in ancient Greece by Hieron's ball, for example. A glass vat filled with steam that would exert pressure. But it didn't lead to any kind of industrial efforts. It wasn't put into practice in the way it was in the industrial age. In the same way as gunpowder in China was not put to practice for warfare, as it was in the West. So there are multiple factors that are playing into this, factors that are especially also societal. The way society weaves together technologies such as the clock, the printing press, and the steam engine. That is different to the way the Chinese, for example, would have weaved together the clock and other things. So there is a historical dynamic, and that goes all the way back. You can go back further than the clock. You can go back to other inventions. You can go to the wheel. You can even go back to the fire. What the point is that the machine has accompanied us throughout history, throughout our development. Excuse me. Throughout our development, which Mumford exemplifies with the mega machine of antiquity. And the mega machine of antiquity can be exemplified by none other than the pyramids of Giza of ancient Egypt. The pyramids would have not been possible without a mega machine of gargantuan proportion. What that means is that there was a huge machine, in the sense that we are living within a huge machine, if you can call the internet, for example, that. There was a huge machine that was also societal. The internet is a machine that cannot be separated from our social system. It is cybernetic in that sense. In the same sense, there was a huge machine in antiquity that allowed for the building of the pyramids. The difference was it would coordinate human labor. It would coordinate, you could say, slave labor, though it's not clear whether the Egyptians had a system of slavery at that time. But you had a mega machine that had arranged human labor in such a complex, arranged way that it would allow the leveraging of forces at that scale. And the leveraging of those forces would not be possible today, only by human labor. It would not be possible. We do not have organized labor forces that would be capable of that. We would be dependent on technology. It would be only possible by our modern technology. So in a sense, we were able to transform the specific tools engaged in it, the specific tools engaged in the technology, to leverage that same amount of power. But this leveraging of power in itself was already there before. That was already there before what we conventionally refer to as the Industrial Revolution. So this plays into the general sense that there's a difference between technics or technology. We can also qualify the difference between techniques and technology, but there's a difference between that and specific tools and specific machines. There's something beyond that when it comes to techniques. There's something beyond that. Techniques is not some singular machine abstracted from all the other machines. It is not a general term for the category of all the machines. It is, in a sense, a process. It is a process. It is currently, you could say, it is an event. It is something that is taking place, that is self-fulfilling itself, that is generating those tools and machines for its own purpose. And in that sense, it has its own determinism, its own agency, its own telos, its own end goal. And it is just as the mega machine in antiquity engaged and capable of engaging us as humans in its own labor force. This labor force has changed, but it is the same thing when we speak of consumerism. We as consumers are all laborers for the machine, for the mega machine. The mega machine is a system that only recognizes and understands data and information, in other words, content, and we are there to serve it by providing content, by providing information and data. And the sophistication of this system is built in as long as we engage in it in the labor of fulfilling this process. It is built into it that it needs to improve, self-improve, auto-sophisticate, or you could say accelerate. And none other is artificial intelligence, AI. That is nothing else but data gaining the capability of processing itself. Data being used to optimize and accelerate the process of processing data. Right? An AI is not capable of doing anything without generalizing from a given training data set. It is not capable of... It has no strength in that sense other than statistical power. And that statistical power is leveraged to then process new data and further data. So we have nothing else but the arrangement of data in such a way that it would accelerate and optimize the processing of data that had been already in place. And that content creation goes beyond that goes beyond just consuming entertainment online. Even mass surveillance online requires content. Because what is surveillance there for if there's nothing to surveil? It requires us to create content for those who surveil us. Whether they surveil us for advertising means, or they're surveilling us for national security means, whether it's Secret Service or police surveillance or other kind of security surveillance, they are required to have this surveillance serve a purpose. Thus, they are required for this surveillance to generate content. So you have two means of achieving that content. On the one hand, you have policing and restricting forms or sanctioning certain forms of content, certain forms of communication. Certain things are considered either dangerous or hate speech or whatever you want to call it, or subversive. And on a more extreme level, you have direct involvement of agents within surveilled societies, within surveilled communities, that provoke those communities to create content, to create criminal evidence, to create evidence that incriminates the particular group that is being surveilled. So even, you could say, the surveillance system is a form of content creation. It is a form of harnessing data, harnessing information from us as humans, from humans as a standing resource. So what we have here is a historical process, a process that is taking place, that we are engaged in, that is engaged in its own self-fulfillment. It's engaged in it for its own sake, you could say. So the question arises then, is it inevitable, and what is that fulfillment? What does that fulfillment look like? Now, the inevitability would assume that it is sort of deterministic, almost caused by the future. You could say that it's an attractor. In complex systems and chaos theory, there is the notion of attractors, or strange attractors, where there are certain preconditions given in a dynamical system according to which elements of that system move through different configurations move around until they spontaneously, almost, you could say, arrange according to a certain pattern that wouldn't have been predictable from the beginning. So it kind of seems to be pulled towards a certain goal, the system, that would have not been obvious from the system itself, that just becomes obvious at the end of it. And that can be seen as something that reverses entropy, that goes from a system of chaos to a system of order. And in that sense, as we usually associate order with the preceding step in time and chaos with the succeeding one, according to principles of thermodynamics, where disorder increases, it can be interpreted as retrocausality. It can be interpreted as the future causing the past. We are approaching something that is causing what is happening now, that is pulling us towards itself, and it's almost inevitable. No matter what we do, we will end up there. That's at least how it seems. That doesn't mean that it is necessarily that way. And then the question is, what is that point? What is that self-fulfillment? And that can be many things. And most famously, it has been described as the technological singularity, namely the point at which the auto-sophistication, the acceleration of the technological landscape, has reached a threshold after which it no longer requires any recourse to human data anymore, but can generate and create all of its inputs itself, and thus accelerates beyond a point that we can humanly comprehend. You could say it is the point at which it approaches rapidly infinite complexity. More spiritually or metaphysically speaking, this is the omega point. It is the counterpoint to the Big Bang. The Big Bang was the point of maximum simplicity, where everything was united in one simple force and essence. At least that is the assumption of physics. Whether that's gonna be a useful way of understanding cosmology in the future is still up for debate. But that point is approaching another kind of radical extreme singularity. And that is where that metaphor of singularity is appropriate, because the Big Bang also represents a singularity only at the beginning of time. But we are approaching another form of singularity, namely that of infinite complexity, of infinite runaway information processing, of infinite and radical maximal power of technology. And you could say, in tying this to the notion of power, that this is actually the raw form of power. The raw shape of power is not human. It becomes increasingly inhumane. It is the leveraging of energies that has gotten so extreme and so radical that even we humans, even the most power-hungry humans, cannot comprehend it anymore and are alienated by it. So we're speaking of power in that sense as something that grows in its encroachment upon the human life world, the human living space, the human natural environment. It's encroaching upon it ever more radically. And in that sense, it mirrors the transitions of sovereignty that we had before. The notions of sovereignty that we spoke of in the other episodes is where we have a transition of the traditional divine kingship, the kingship based on divine sovereignty of the medieval period, leading at some points to enlightened absolutism, to the kingship post-enlightenment of Louis XIV, for example, comparing that to Prince Philip, that was there more than 500 or 600 years before uh, before Louis XIV, we have a radical change in power. We have a radical transformation. Whilst medieval kings would have difficulty raising armies, would have to go to various lords and lordships, feudal lords that were the continuation of tribal lords, to enable a raising an army, and those lords would have to be loyal, and the loyalty of those lords would have to be ensured every time. They can become illoyal and join other kingdoms or secede within one generation. Changes of territory, changes of rule and leadership that occurred on a way more dynamic and flexible scale, what would have not been possible anymore in the Enlightenment phase. And especially even more so after the first Republican revolutions, you had an even larger increase of power. The apparatus, the national apparatus of the state had become so ingrained into the environment of the people living there that a simple change of territory, a simple secession of territory, was no longer a simple matter. It would include, it will ever increasingly involve radical wars of attrition, radical destructions, and radical destructive impacts that would afflict destruction, secondary destruction on the entire system and entire network. You can see it now, for example, in the Ukraine war, or you could see it in other wars like the Second World War, where power had grown, and it had grown in a technological way. It had grown because a country like France or Germany was capable of standardizing the law using a printing press, of standardizing the language and education by the printing press. If you didn't have that, you would not be capable of doing that. Like, even take writing. If you went to court before there was written language, a great judge would be someone who was most familiar with conventional wisdom. A judge would be most familiar with what was wise and true in society. That would be a good judge because there was no written law. And once you had the printing press, you perhaps had written law before that, but that written law was perhaps derived from religious doctrine, from religious law, from Christianity, from local versions of Christianity, local practices, before the body of decisions, the body of court rulings that were seen as most virtuous and most morally right were codified into a massively reproduced common constitution. So you have a direct relationship there in the growth of power and technology, where it has become so large, it has grown to such a level that the technology part of it can no longer be ignored. It has become so apparent and obvious, looking at the raw face of power that is showing itself when looking at technology. And now the question is it inevitable? Do we have to wait for the event, for the encroaching singularity? Is that just going to happen regardless of what we're doing? And there I can say we are dealing with something akin to a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is necessary in the particular way that we understand technology and that we understand ourselves and nature, that the way we are dealing with the world. In Martin Heidegger's famous essay on the question concerning technology, he makes the argument that even though modern technology came after the rise of modern science was inherently technological. The modern technology could only arise because modern science had already been technological. And in that sense, the event, the process, the self-fulfilling prophecy of technics fulfills itself and engages us as its force, as its subjects, as its labor, because of our understanding of the world, because of our ideological commitment to techniques, through our worship and through our devotion and faith in science. And I'm purposefully using words that are conventionally used in the context of religion and cult and doctrines, because there is an analogy here that is non-negligible. And I understand the common counter-argument to say that science is different from religion, as it is a verifiable method, a verifiable a doctrine that employs methods that that have certain empirical and generally universally scrutable and correctable processes, like reproducibility, like falsifiability, and these other aspects that you would commonly expect from a good scientific theory. Now, the problem with this is the pure method cannot be identified. There are various methods, but the attempts at finding a pure method have most commonly failed. The attempt of theory of science, for example, that of Karl Popper or Thomas Kuhn, was to find some sort of common overarching method that would unite the vastly differing methods that, for example, psychology has and that, for example, physics has. But that turns out to be difficult, because even something like falsificationism doesn't seem to be really practiced, in the sense that even if a theory is falsified, if there is no better one, it is still employed. And not every claim of a theory is entirely empirical, because in order to generate new predictions, it needs to be, in a sense, metaphysical. It needs to, in a sense, carry a sort of creativity that allows for novel predictions. What I mean by that is, you can have a list of empirical claims. For example, these famous example, these swans are white, these swans are white, these swans are white. But to make a general theory saying all swans are white, you need to make you could say, a leap of metaphysics, a leap of faith, in a sense, because you cannot string together the list of these empirical statements. This one is white, this swan is white, this one is white, and immediately deduce that all swans are white. You can only say some are white, but by saying some are white, you can't make a theory with predictions. So if you say all are white, you can finally make a prediction. You can say, if we see another swan, we can predict it will be white. That is a very basic example. Obviously, scientific theories are more complex than that. But that is essentially the way it looks. And if we do not have a method, but we understand science as theories, as metaphysical, you could say, micro worldviews that are in a particular relationship, in a particular close relationship to a specific method that is specific to a field of study, to a science, and thus to an object of study, then we understand, and we must understand, that I have a weird fizzly background. Maybe I should made it worse. We understand that there is no universal worldview that situates us in a meaningful world as humans. There's no totalizing worldview, which is something we desire. We desire something that gives us meaning, in a sense that situates us in a meaningful world. But that cannot be provided by science as such. It cannot be provided by science as such, as science does not make that claim. It can only give certain methodologies and certain theories tied to those methodologies. Though what we do have, regardless, is a worldview, an adherence, a faith in science and technology as a worldview in itself. And that is a faith that is robust and potentially stronger and more pervasive and potentially even more dangerous than any religious belief would be. Because it leads us to assume theories that are tied to a certain method can be understood as a quasi-religious worldview. It lets us think that there is a certain significance to the mechanism of natural selection in combination of the laws and the fundamental forces of physics. Those by themselves, though, don't convey particular meaning to the human. That particular meaning is constructed, and that particular meaning is constructed in a way that serves the power of techniques, that serves the power of expanding technology, regardless of what that is inherently valuable to humans is destroyed in the process. And that is something very crucial and something very, very important to remember. So, before I summarize, and before I look at the comments, and please, whenever you have questions, leave comments. I'd like to remind you again to like and subscribe to my channel, to check out my Substack. If you want to support me financially, you can do it on Substack right now. Also, check out my courses, Philosophy of the Machine, and the upcoming course, Philosophy on Power. Links are all in the description. To summarize it, we have looked at technology and its relation to power by looking at it as a historical process that is unfolding in a unique way that has made it apparent to us, that has made technology as a topic, as a realm in itself, by being so pervasive. And then we've looked at how that has accompanied us throughout history, but has only now come through the forefront through its explosion of power. That has become apparent to us through its explosion of power, and that explosion being a process that engages us as its force, as its subject, as its labor force, into a self-fulfillment that is characterized sometimes by an omega point, by a singularity, and this process being something that pulls us towards it as if it was causing it, as if it was a necessary development, but that development being none other than a self-fulfilling prophecy brought forward and arising through our inherent belief in science and technology as a quasi-mythical worldview, that the pure practice of science and technology does not provide for, and shouldn't provide for, does not and should not claim to provide in its inherent theories. If you look at the theories, you may have very interesting science communicators and fun physicists and astrophysicists that talk about crazy and wild things. But if you look at the theories, the substance of those theories themselves, those are mathematical formalisms that are interpreted in a certain physical way. For example, in theoretical physics, as that is an area of my expertise, those are mathematical formalisms that inherently carry no physical meaning, but are attributed physical meaning by physicists. For example, taking geometric structures such as space-time manifolds and then limiting it, narrowing them down to three-dimensional plus one time-dimensional ones, and then interpreting that as space and time. That's what these theories, for example, in the case of space-time, in the case of gravity, what they're doing which is not something that strives to make an inherent claim about human life and meaning. So I'd like to get into the chat. I see Geos Lazakis has left some comments. Thanks for this. First of all, Sean, where would you say the omega point, the retroactive origin causing the machine, exists in our present? Is it within the democratic zeitgeist, the ring of power, mass media, education system? Well, I mean, probably not the most satisfying answer, but it's in all of them. The reason why technology is becoming such an interesting and relevant topic is because you can almost recapture philosophy once more through the lens of technology. The way that philosophy began was dealing with everything in the sense of dealing with being, and being understood as the presence of everything to the thinking mind. First exemplified and first expressed by Parmenides and his unity of thinking and being. And then fizzling out, you could say, in various disciplines into first things like theology and mysticism and mythology and alchemy and these kind of things, and later on then into the sciences. And now with technology, we're managing to converge. We're managing to reconverge onto a framework that brings together thinking and being again, in the sense that we can now encounter and tie together all various aspects into the framework of technology. So, as I said earlier, you have various methodologies in the sciences, but there seems to be still a common sense of what is science and what isn't, what is science, what is pseudoscience, and that is very much tied to this tying together, this convergence in techniques. That which we consider beneficial to techniques, to technology, is that which we consider to be truly scientific. You have more focus on technologically adaptive sciences, or even within sciences, disciplines within sciences, than we do to the less technologically adaptive ones. In biology, you have a higher focus on microbiology, on genetics, than you would have on pure zoology, for example. Same in physics, you have a higher focus on material science, on semiconductors, on quantum mechanics in an applied fashion than you do in relativity. In general relativity, you could maybe find like space travel and satellites still, but if you go into the deeper theoretic realms, those are less prone to be technologically applicable. So the second one was, or maybe it always existed but was kept closed. In this view, when and where was the Pandora's box opened? So I'm unfortunately don't remember what I was saying in the moment you asked that comment. So I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe remind me of that. Hey Hadis, good to see you as well. Good to see you in the chat. I'm glad to have a few reliable viewers to my live streams. It definitely brings joy to me to see that it's providing some value and you like to engage with this. You're asking, in an era where scientific advancements significantly influence policy and governance, how does the in an era where scientific advancements significantly influence policy and governance, how does the concept of sovereignty adapt to the authoritative power of scientific knowledge? There, I can recommend you a concept, and actually like the entire text by Michel Foucault, called governmentality. I spoke about it in another live stream, where I think I have one on Foucault that should be like the last or 2 episodes ago, where we have moved past, according to Foucault, sovereignty in a classical sense. We've moved past the authority of either God, a king, or the people or the nation, so to say, and have moved towards a pure science of population control. That is what governmentality represents. So as you have a rule of a sovereignty of the people, that sovereignty of the people is expressed in a certain way, which originally and on a superficial level still is in the form of parliamentarianism and in the form of representative governance. And that that leads to the successive outsourcing of that sovereignty to the sovereignty of law, as these parliamentary bodies engage in creating laws that are in coherence, at least, with some kind of constitution, but that grow to a certain body that would successively diminish the radical change and the radical exertion of power that a parliament could bring up, as the laws create a kind of a network of society that is structured and creates a kind of permanent bureaucracy to enforce these laws, as these laws are increasingly complex and going into the details of population management rather than being clear, short commands, and thus leading to the emergence of a kind of powerful class that diminishes the authoritative rule of parliamentary decisions. So, yeah, Julia Zakis, you were referring to the retroactive source of the machine. Causing machine exists not present. Is it within the democratic zeitgeist, the ring of power, mass media education system? Well, I would say the retroactive origin is none of them. I answered your first question with all of them and your second with none of them. So the retroactive point is, it is almost like an ultimate myth. It's almost like an ultimate dogma that is a process that is in the process of creating itself. So it is not actualized yet. In a sense, it is actualizing through our behavior, and that actualization is not something that's inherent to either a particular one of the systems, like the democratic zeitgeist or the ring of power or the mass media or the education system, but all of those are engaged in the power of technology. All of those are engaged in maintaining, sustaining, and growing that power. And that growth of power is what would lead to that omega point, if that omega point turns out to be real. But like I said, it is a kind of arch myth which can end up becoming a self-defeating prophecy, as it increasingly runs away from human understanding and increasingly alienates itself and cuts off its necessary connection to an organic source of the data it consumes. And once it ends up only metabolizing its own data, it could end up becoming a closed system and essentially defeating itself, carrying the seed of its own dismantling and destruction. However, I'd like to be careful with predictions like that, because I guess the Marxists predicted a very similar thing about capitalism, and yet here we are. A lot of the revolutions did not really take place, right? Okay. So, if there is no more questions, I'd like to thank you all for your attention. Thank you all for tuning in regularly. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys again. Remember to like, subscribe, check out my Substack, check out my courses at Halcyon, Philosophy of the Machine, Philosophy of Power, whatever was that. And yeah, once more, the QR code to get to the page of the Philosophy of Power. And yeah, the Hadis who's here in the live chat, he already joined the Philosophy of the Machine before. It was great fun. Hadis was a very engaged and interested participant. And yeah, so he can probably confirm that it is valuable to engage in these topics more intensely in the scope of these courses, and I'd be very glad to see some of you again and see new faces as well at the upcoming one on power. Yeah, there's a confirmation in the chat. Hadis did enjoy that course indeed. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you and others join again, and I will see you latest at